Hello, everyone. Welcome to Back to School Contingent Faculty Members' Attitudes Toward Their Employment During the COVID-19 Pandemic session by Nolan Higdon, University of California, Santa Cruz. Welcome, Nolan. Before we get started, I would like to remind you a few housekeeping items. Please note that this session is being recorded for our colleagues who could not join us in real time. We are using automated Zoom captions during the live event, and we will edit the recording transcripts before we share them with you to be more accurate. At the bottom of the Zoom window, there's a closed caption button, and you will see the live transcript text underneath that button. Select to turn them on or off as you prefer. Please pose your questions using the chat function that we will moderate and discuss with our panelists. Toward the end of the we'll share how we can continue the conversation online and share some additional resources to support your teaching. Now, I'd like to pass the microphone to Nolan. Thank you, Nolan.
Yes, thank you very much. Do I have a screen share power? I think I do.
I think you do.
Okay, good. All right. Welcome, everyone. This is some research that I just started doing recently. And so it's still kind of in the development stage. So it's both sharing some research and hoping to hear from all of you about your thoughts about it. So what I'll do is kind of go through the research, talk about this concept of the Great Resignation and how it applies to inequities in faculty, hirings in higher ed. And then kind of briefly review some of the literature, my methodology, just so you all kind of know what I did, and then talk about the findings and then open it up to talk to all of you. Sound good?
Sounds great.
Okay. So there's been this idea that's known as the Great Resignation. It's still pretty ill-defined, but I found it kind of interesting as a concept as we watch it develop. And it's this term that management professor Anthony Klotz has used to describe workers' rejection of labor relations that existed pre-COVID-19. So just to give some context about that, roughly about 9 million people lost their job during the pandemic, but much to the surprise of employers, many in the labor force refused to rejoin their previous place of employment. Millions of other people who were employed actually left the labor force, 4.3 million in the month of August alone. And by the end of 2021, we started to see an empowerment of labor for the first time in decades. That is to say that employers desperately needed workers. And this was happening simultaneously with what we called Striketober, which was in October of 2021. Many people went on strike, and some people called this a workers' revolution or unorganized general strike. So that's what kind of the Great Resignation is responding to. It's important to remember that the Great Resignation does not argue that the pandemic caused workers' rejection of the workplace. The argument is that by getting either time off work or perspective of how they're treated in the workforce, people reevaluated their priorities. And that's why it's important to note the context, the economic context in which the pandemic occurred. It was after 4 decades of neoliberal governance, which slashed the welfare states, championed fiscal policies that privileged the financial sector, and largely led to economic stagnation for the majority of the working class. And it left U.S. workers in general in this precarious state where they face waning job security, low wages, minuscule benefits, and a very weak social safety nets. As a result, what folks have had to do is try to pull together multiple sources of income at once, and this has been referred to as the gig economy. Now, until recently, most of the discourses about the gig economy ignored faculty in higher education. And some scholars argued that, this is because much of the labor analysis on faculty in higher ed focuses on tenured members. But research shows that there are two types of faculty in higher education. Those who are tenured, which some refer to as part of the professional managerial class. Those are professionals who derive security and salary and benefits from their position. And then working class academics. These are the contingent faculty members, what I'll call them throughout the rest of the presentation. But these are adjuncts, or lecturers, or non-tenured faculty members. And their experience is really defined by that same precarity, low wages, and dearth of benefits that much of the working class face in the United States.
Nolan, can I just stop you quickly? We're still seeing the first slide, so it's not moving. So can you stop sharing and share again?
Oh, absolutely. I'll
Okay.
try and
now we see slide 8. Yeah, thank you.
No problem. If that happens again, please feel free to interrupt me.
Sure.
I apologize.
Sure. I wrote in the chat box. I believe you didn't see that. So yeah, thank you. Sorry.
No problem. Are you able to see all the animation? Is the slide totally full with words on the right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Okay, so studies have repeatedly shown that contingent faculty experience less than ideal material conditions. They average about $3,500 per course each term, an annual salary between $21,000 and $35,000. Only about 1.6% of colleges offer contingent faculty members medical benefits. Just over 7% offer retirement benefits. And when I was doing this research, I was amazed how many colleges I found which had simply gotten rid of tenured positions. 40% of contingent faculty members struggle to afford basic household expenses. 25% require public assistance. And ironically, we often refer to these folks, and I'm one of these folks, we often refer to them as part-time workers, but typically speaking, they actually work more than what we refer to as full-time employees. One of the documented cases of that was an instructor who, for 25 years, taught 16 hours a day, 80 hours a week on 7 campuses.
Nolan, sorry to interrupt again. I think it's happening again. I see that you're clicking and moving. Yeah, now we just moved. Okay, perfect. Okay. And if you I'm not sure if you prefer to do it like a bigger.
I could do it like this. This is what you're asking? Perfect.
Yeah. Now we can. Yeah.
If that's better for everyone else, let's just do that. Okay. And so this group of people we're talking about in academia are not a minority. They are, the majority of faculty members. Contingent faculty used to be a minority, roughly about 1/3 of all faculty in the 80s, and now they represent 2/3. Some studies have them at about 3/4. So my 2/3 estimate is a conservative estimate, believe it or not. Now, prior to the pandemic, the most recent study on contingent faculty attitudes toward their job was in 2016, where about 41% were satisfied with their job, compared to 69% of tenured faculty. So what I want to kind of see was like, were they affected by this Great Resignation? Are they also experiencing this rejection of their current employment? And there was some evidence to say there were, right? There's been these large waves of strikes in 2018 and 2019. In 2021, we saw strikes in Pennsylvania. We saw the UC lecturers strike, which ended up in victory. Go team. In 2022, we also see a wave of other educators going on strike as well. So there does seem to be some rejection of the current relations that educators have with their institution. So this study was a national study where I had faculty members take a survey, contingent faculty take a survey to try and capture their attitudes as they are now and see if I could find any changes that occurred due to COVID. Briefly, I just put sort of one slide together to go over the literature. There's a lot to say about the literature, and I'm happy to get into in the Q&A. But essentially, scholars have mostly agreed that the adoption of neoliberal managerialism in the 1980s increased university and colleges' reliance on contingent faculty. Basically, the way to be more efficient in terms of cost was to get rid of tenured positions and get more precarious positions like contingent faculty. Scholars have been examined the challenges that this precarity poses to faculty and the work they're trying to do in terms of like the limited representation of contingent faculty in campus governance, unions, how it affects student outcomes, and how it affects teacher motivations. But there's been, really little scholarship about their attitude toward their employment in general, and specifically after the COVID-19 or during the COVID-19 pandemic. So 54 participants completed the survey. Their age was from 26 years old to 83 years old. The mean average was about 49. Got some new teachers who taught 1 year, some folks who had taught 42 years, and the average was the mean was 11 and a half years and a median of about 8 years. And I have some of the gender, race and sexuality demographics there as well. I'll say one of the interesting limitations of my study was that in contingent faculty, we know that faculty of color are overrepresented. But in this study, they were actually underrepresented as more white contingent faculty participated in the study. And I just have this on the screen. I'm not going to go through these, but just to give you an idea of the many fields of study in which these folks came from. So this wasn't just like sort of the radical folks in the social sciences or something like that. They came from across the disciplines in higher ed. And so they completed this digital survey. The data went under 2 cycles of coding, descriptive and pattern coding, and it revealed 4 findings, which I'll get into now. So the first finding was that contingent faculty members identify themselves as effective educators who are overworked and exhausted. And there's an important link between that, what they define as hard work, and their exhaustion. These folks did report deep satisfaction with the teaching aspect of their job. That is to say, they like being in the classroom. They like the art of teaching. They really value their positive relationships and interactions with students. And they quite proudly tout how their hard work leads to student success. But that hard work necessitates long work days. This is 60 to 80 hour weeks, an intensive work schedule that often leaves them too tired to address non-work related priorities. So things like having a partner, having children, maintaining one's home. These are things that they've had to negotiate. Can they actually maintain a romantic relationship? Can they have children? Can they maintain a house and make a living? It was, to be quite frank, a lot of the stories were quite, heart-wrenching. These are folks telling you that, after a long week of working 7 days straight, their house is a mess and they, have no connection with the people they live with. So that was the first finding from the data. The second finding was that these folks perceive that their labor and humanity is not valued in academia. So despite doing all this hard work that they really value, they don't think that their hard work is valued within their institution or institutions if they work in multiple places. So they reported that both their labor and humanity is not valued. history instructor of 31 years, explained, quote, I have never felt valued in any of the schools where I've been a faculty member. They said that they are treated like they are expendable, and they constantly feel insecure and unstable in their profession and employment. They also reported feeling alienated and isolated on campus. They said we're treated as an other. They feel unsupported and politically disempowered. I heard second-class citizen used a lot in the survey results. Many talked about how they simply feel invisible because they never meet administrators or rarely interact with other faculty, tenured and contingent. And that was one of the interesting things in the study. One of the questions I asked was, describe your typical administrator, describe your typical tenured faculty member. And many of them said, I can't because I never have interactions with them. Those who did report having interactions, they said those interactions are really what is central to their feelings of being undervalued. They said it feels like they're oppressed, they're disrespected. They feel like some full-time faculty simply get some self-gratification from exploiting part-time or contingent faculty. As a result, these folks view academia as an abusive environment. Again, things like exploitative and second-class citizen dominated this finding as well. So my third finding I found really interesting, and I talk about this in the end about how I think there's more need for more study here, but a lot of these folks talked about how after being in higher ed as a contingent faculty member, they not only feel resentment and disillusionment, but they feel like they were duped by graduate school. Like graduate school did not prepare them for the reality of what this job or the environment of higher ed was like. Just to give you an idea, one of the questions I asked folks was, would you recommend working in higher ed to students? And overwhelmingly, the answers were, in the negative, which I have on the screen there. But folks talk about absolutely not. They wrote no in all caps, hell no, things like that. And so this spoke to people feeling like that they were not really prepared for the reality of what it was like to be in higher ed. They said they were initially really excited, but over time it grew to more and more disillusionment. And it said this ultimately led to a
Nolan, I think you're frozen. Or is it me? Okay. Let's see. Okay. We lost him now. I'm going to pause the recording until he comes back. And he's back. Nolan.
Sorry about that.
No problem. Welcome back.
You all are being so patient with me today. Thank you. I'm traveling, so I'm not in my home office where this stuff usually doesn't happen. So I greatly apologize. But I think I was on this slide, correct? These folks talked about how they feel like they're trapped in academia. And what I found interesting about this finding was they all had some, not all, I should say, majority of them had an escape plan to get out of the situation, and that really spoke to how trapped they felt. They reported that this disillusionment, they had like this inner conflict about how disillusioned they were. So some participants reported that they had kind of slowly divested themselves from their institution. So they were treating this more and more just like a job where they would just show up, do it, and try and forget about it when they get home. Others said that, just the slightest bit of security, such as like a longer contract or a slight wage increase, or just some sort of like the institution showing them some value led to more job satisfaction. And looking at this in the context of COVID-19, basically what I sort of found was that the pandemic really just exacerbated frustrations and challenges that contingent faculty already had in higher ed, and made the escape almost more pressing. A writing instructor said, a writing instructor of 25 years said, "I used to love my place of work and my job. I enjoyed the environment of learning and collaboration that existed, despite all of us being adjuncts. That environment has eroded over the past 5 years and the past 2 pandemic years especially." And so these folks feel even more exhausted, more overworked, more isolated when you look at their responses. So when looking at the data and the findings, it really complemented a lot of existing findings. So contingent faculty have obviously felt this way for quite some time. But I think it also led to some interesting areas for future studies. So one was looking at kind of the group dynamics or organizational communication between contingent faculty, tenure faculty, and administrators. And I started doing some research on that. Also about what messages do faculty receive, or grad students receive about becoming faculty. I think we need more research about that. Are we, selling an inaccurate or invisible product would be an interesting question to delve deeper into. Also more about, looking at contingent faculty working conditions and their institutional investments. Is it really inefficient to treat faculty like this? Would you get more investment from them with better pay and better conditions and more security? As I mentioned, the study does reveal that, COVID has intensified pre-existing qualms. However, whether these will, become a movement like that which is happening in the supposed Great Resignation remains to be seen. But education scholars should pay attention to that. It does seem like you've pushed contingent faculty about as far as you can. And then lastly, I found that the findings are also instructive for institutions of higher ed, particularly, thinking about how to create a more stable workforce and what benefits that students will derive from having that. And I think one way to put kind of pressure on educational leaders is maybe college ranking systems should include the amount of contingent faculty more prominently in how they determine schools' rankings. Possibly to incentivize more security for faculty. And then as far as faculty who are currently in the classroom, particularly working with grad students, also being a little more honest with those students about the realities of higher ed and how many tenured positions exist, and what is the reality of being a contingent faculty member. So with that, I'll turn to the Q&A portion, and I thank you all for giving me an opportunity to talk about my study.
Thank you very much, Nolan. And I'm going to share a Padlet link in the chat box as well. So you can also put your comments, questions, or anything on the Padlet, or you can use the chat box. Thank you so much, Nolan. It was really good to learn more about all these statistics, all this data, because we're so focused on online teaching and learning that sometimes we forget the attitudes toward employment and what's going on in that area, right? So that was a great reminder for us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And There's one question from Pam. Pam, actually, you can unmute yourself and ask the question if you feel comfortable.
Yeah, I am wondering if someone's done a study of a similar type for full-time faculty.
Not that I've seen. I know campuses have done surveys, but I'm not aware of any scholarship that has done something similar for tenure track folks.
Okay, well, I'm at a community college, so it's tenure track-ish, but it's not, research tenure track. And my colleagues of this level have reported a lot of the same stuff, maybe not as vehemently as what you put in here, but I think it's a more global problem than just the part-time. And it made me super sad to hear our part-time people are part of the department family, but I don't know about the rest of the campus, that they were so mistreated so many places. But I'm just curious to know how widespread it is there.
Yeah, and anecdotally, I can say, because I teach on many campuses, including community colleges. I know at some of the community colleges, we've had some difficult discussions about how having so many contingent faculty actually creates more work for tenured faculty, because they have to take on more of the department work. They have to spend more time kind of corralling all the different adjuncts in their department to get to teach classes. So one of the points we've kind of made to unions is to really think more about how contingent, not only the plight of contingent faculty, but how having so many contingent faculty affects the work environment for tenured folks as well.
Yeah, there's a greater managerial component for people that aren't paid for managerial duties, kind of thing. But thankfully, my department is pretty small. So, but I hear what you're saying.
That's a great question, Pam. Thank you very much. We have one question in the chat box, Nolan, and one in the Padlet link. Amy, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yeah, so I mean, first, thanks for collecting this data, because I think it's really important to kind of understand the problem better. But I think most of the people at this conference are like instructional designers, faculty developers, faculty that aren't in administrative positions. So what can we do to help alleviate this, make it better? I don't know what role we can play in improving the situation.
It's a great question, and I can give you my I guess sort of opinion on this, and I welcome others to chime in, because I'm sure there's a diversity of views on this, and that's a good thing. I would say that one of the things that comes really clear in the scholarship, and I didn't put this all in the slideshow, but this shift to kind of this neoliberal governance, one of the effects of it have been that faculty of all faculty have been transformed from professionals to employees, and they've really lost a voice in campus governance. And so I think one way that faculty, no matter if you're instructional designer or whatever, can affect the campus is really uniting, particularly through unions, and putting pressure, whether it be on politicians in the district or the chancellor's office or the state level, to make sure that the power dynamics on campus are rearranged. Because one thing that I can say with almost certainty over looking at the last 50 years of history, the administrative class has increasingly taken more and more power from faculty, and at the same time put more and more work on faculty. Some scholars call this academia. And academia refers to faculty who work in an institution of higher education, but they're constantly doing work that is anything but scholarship or education. So they're having meetings, they're filling boxes, they're filling out paperwork, managing SLOs, et cetera, but they're doing anything but actually working in terms of education or developing scholarship.
That's interesting. I've never heard that term before, Nolan. Academia, you said?
Yeah, I think, if I remember correct, I think it's from 2014 is the when it's first started being used.
That's good to know. And neoliberal governance, can you define that? That's another question in the chat box.
Oh, sure. Yeah, it's kind of a broad term because there's some disagreements on exactly what neoliberalism is, but some of the aspects of it we see in education are this idea of depending on like meritocracies, appealing to hierarchical management, right? So there's these like basically pyramid structures where information trickles down from the top to the bottom of how the campus is going to be run versus that shared governance. It's kind of a meritocratic way of thinking. So someone's obviously in that management position because they worked the hardest and deserved it. And someone has tenure because they worked hard and deserve it. Someone's contingent faculty and doesn't have tenure or pay because they didn't work hard enough or have the skills. It tends to take like a kind of a colorblind analysis to everything. So they never kind of examine the ways in which their privilege on campus, those in power, their privilege on campus, derives from existing inequities. Instead, they sort of defer to the meritocracy, acting like it's colorblind. They, look at things like faculty unions as wasteful and basically protecting ineffective faculty in keeping their job. Whereas if you get rid of unions and you force faculty to work harder because they're afraid of losing their job. Those are some of the aspects of neoliberal governance. Like, there's like a much longer explanation, but if there's any of those specific aspects you want me to expand upon or other details, I'm happy to share. Yes, Natasha, the corporatization of higher ed is probably the succinct way to say neoliberal managerialism.
Thank you. Thanks for the explanation. And we have one more question on the Padlet. It's anonymous. Does being part of a union make a difference to contingent faculty attitudes?
I didn't see that in the study. And I didn't put this into findings because I didn't ask specifically about unions and I didn't collect enough data to warrant a finding. But I will say that many of the faculty kind of responded that they didn't feel like their union really did represent them. That is, the union was there to represent the full-timers, and most contingent faculty were paying dues to where they were a second-class citizen. However, some of them who have independent unions, where they have like a lecturers union or something like that, they did report a little more satisfaction. Like when their union had a gain of like a longer contract or a little bit of a pay increase or something like that, they said they felt a little more secure and a little more satisfied. I don't really have enough data to say that with any certainty, but that's kind of generally what I saw in the existing data.
Thank you, Nolan. Any other questions or comments? I'm also keeping an eye on the Padlet now. And also, Nolan, please also take a look at the Padlet later on, because sometimes our audience may come up with a question later on and put their questions on Padlet so that this discussion will go on for a while. So that would be great if you look at it after the conference. And feel free to post any questions or comments after the conference as well. We're not going to let Nolan go anywhere, right, Nolan?
Oh, the tech controls everything, but we'll see.
Okay, if we don't have any other questions or comments, I would like to thank again Nolan for providing all this wonderful data and insights about attitudes towards employment during COVID. Thank you very much. And our next session will start at 11. So again, we have 3 Zoom rooms for each session. So please take a look at the schedule and join us again at 11. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.